We got to see how our next guests, and all guests are coming to you via the Fire Wings hotline. Try one of their delicious flavors of wings today. Fire Wings, just wing it. Yeah. Scott Bair, how did you celebrate that just a great Raider victory this weekend?
By writing until 2:00 in the morning, and then realizing all the kitchens were closed and having a crappy sandwich at a casino. How about you?
Yeah, bro, but you probably wrote so hard, dude. You went for it. You wrote so over the top, man. You wrote into the middle of the night.
I broke the keyboard, like I was hitting it so hard, like I was shoving my excitement into every single letter. It's there were a lot of good quotes. I mean, Richie Incognito was, predictably fired up, and they loved, they have this us versus them mentality. The NFL hates Vontaze Burfict, and the whole world hates us, and apparently even us media types like Khalil Mack more than the Raiders and all those types of things. They had an appropriate amount of. They had a whole bag of ruffles on their shoulder, and they were more than happy to tell us all about them after that game.
I don't have anything in front of me to back this up, but this feels like the biggest 2 wins in a row for the Raiders in like 30 years, it seems like. We went from thinking they were going to, after getting worked by the Chiefs and Vikings, and you're going into what was a hot Indianapolis Colts team, and that was a bigger blowout than the score reflected. And then against the Bears, let's make no mistake, and I'm sure you'll back this up, Scott, this is not a Raider home game. This is a Raider road game in every sense, including fans and attendance. And somehow, not only did they jump out to the early lead, but I think even more impressive, the Bears roared all the way back. They came back and they took the lead, and then the Raiders just showed moxie and end up winning that game that I don't know if anybody thought they were going to win outside of that locker room. Gruden's got them rolling a bit.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. For as much as I think Gruden has been at times a convenient and appropriate punchline for mistakes he's made with personnel, he's taken a lot of risks that haven't panned out very well. I don't think we've ever sat here and said Gruden's not a good X's and O's football coach, right?
Right.
And I don't think I've ever said Paul Guenther is really not good at designing defenses. Maybe his defense is a little too complicated, and it takes some time to adjust. But my point is that the coaching has been A1, right? Like in terms of game plans, what has been happening is they start hot because their scripts are really good. And then they kind of lose track when other teams adjust and exploit their talent deficiencies. But you look at that Bears game plan to a start, and really throughout the game, shutting Khalil Mack down was very impressive. I mean, they only put him one-on-one 3 times, and I think 2 of those were cut blocks. And they had varied schemes, and they did what a lot of teams can't do, is they got the Bears defensive line worried about the run so much that they weren't able to consistently rush the passer. They had a very good recipe for it. And when things got tough, young players stayed poised. Part of that's the guys that they drafted. Other part of it is coaches preparing them to focus on the X's and O's. So I really think that a lot of credit goes to what John Gruden and Paul Guenther have done in establishing a team that does not wilt. Last year's team would have lost both of these games, and we would be talking about something much different. This coaching staff has kept it together despite all the crap that's gone on around it, and has it playing good football, and has it adjusted to their talent losses. They found a way to go from an Antonio Brown-centric offense to one focused on the run, and they've done it in really 3 or 4 weeks, and now they're humming.
Scott, obviously without what they needed to do was do what you just brought up, is slow down Khalil Mack. They shut him down. The offensive line doesn't let Derek Carr get touched, but they're like the rest of us. They hear things, and they know that we all praise Mack and a terrible deal seemingly for the Raiders. How much personal satisfaction did they get in that part of it? I mean, beating the Bears and shutting down Khalil Mack to the locker room, how much did they just enjoy quieting that noise?
I think that they're glad that part of it's over, just because Khalil normally doesn't say anything. He normally mumbles through interviews and gives you a bunch of cliches, but over the course of the week, he said, I'm going to make him pay for that. He wanted to be a Raider for life. and he didn't have that opportunity. And that was a big deal to him. It was a big deal that he didn't get extended at the same time as Derek Carr, and there's been some animosity building up from that point on. And he was disappointed at some comments that came out during his contract holdout of what John Gruden said and all those types of things. Now, the roster turnover has been so great that a lot of the guys, I'd say, a vast majority of the guys who are playing for this Raiders team right now have never met Khalil Mack. John Gruden likes to say he's never met him either. I don't know about that. But nonetheless, this was a big deal for the coaching staff. And I think more than anything else, it doesn't mean that they won the trade, right? Just because the piece they picked up for Mack, Josh Jacobs, was really good on one day and Khalil Mack wasn't good on one day, doesn't mean that they've magically won the trade. But I think it is affirmation that even without what was a Hall of Fame player, that they've managed to find a way to win and to find a way to improve this team. So I do think that there was a satisfaction that is involved with it. There's also a sense of relief that they got through it with a victory and can now kind of move beyond it. And I think there's a lot of confidence to be gained from these last two wins because, as you guys put it, they kind of put it to them, and they did what they wanted to do. And I think especially, I'm a big old school football guy, right? When you can run and the whole world knows that you're running, I think that is the biggest load of confidence. That is something that can affect an entire game, and the Raiders are getting very good at that, and I think that's pretty impressive.
Scott Bair with us. Scott, Jay Gruden, any scuttlebutt, any thoughts on him joining his brother's staff? Is there any Jay Gruden talk at all that you're hearing out there?
Yeah, definitely. Now, exactly when and what time and for how long and all those types of things, I don't know necessarily, and John didn't want to speculate on it, which is not surprising, but you can always add a senior offensive assistant to the head coach or whatever business card that you want to draw up, right? And why not? Jay Gruden's already getting paid. You could give him the minimum to bring in a guy that's worked with John Gruden and has worked with Greg Olson and a lot of these other guys. Now, to say he's going to, they could do that tomorrow. Right. I think they should do that tomorrow. I mean, why not get another voice, a respected voice in the room, knowing full well that if at the end of the year Jay gets an opportunity to be a play caller that actually, to be an offensive guy that gets to call plays or to be a head coach somewhere, I don't know what his future holds. He's got the most powerful coaching agent in the world. So, and Sean McVay was asked the same question, and I think that those are the two best options for him to come in, be a consultant. He's a good offensive mind, and then he can kind of see what comes in 2020. That makes sense to me. I would not be surprised if it's done by the next time we talk. I would also not be surprised if Jay Gruden understands he's getting paid a bunch of money for the rest of the year and he wants to sit and reevaluate and try to make some choices in 2020 and come on at that point.
I know, Scott, when we talked a couple weeks ago about the Raiders eventually making their trip to London, John Gruden had said he felt they did it wrong last year. They traveled late, and they didn't play well at all against Seattle. I don't know how you'd quantify this, but I think there is something to going to Indianapolis, winning, playing well, and then getting to London early, and that bonding time. The Niners had some success with 2 straight weeks on the road. I don't know, again, how you'd quantify it, but what kind of factor do you think that was in how they played just being together away for basically 2 weeks?
Now, in 2014, they had an identical schedule, and they laid a big fat egg, right? I think in this particular instance, it was massive because of the timing, right? Vontaze gets suspended for the rest of the season. We're not going to get Carmichael started on that again, but nonetheless, he gets suspended right away, right? And everybody's upset. And there's a lot to make up for when you remove him from the football playing equation, right? And I think for them to all be together to say how pissed off they are and to technically work out what the issues are for that particular loss is important, and for them to sit down. Obviously, coaches never leave the building, and they can work on game plans all night and in Alameda, but players go home to their families and take care of their kids and step away from it. And that's not what happened here. This was Tyre Whitehead and Nicholas Morrow, the linebackers, huddling together in hotel rooms at 10 o'clock at night. This is not a bunch of guys that went out partying all week. I know several of the prominent players never left the resort, and I think that because of the exact timing of what happened, that it did allow them to come together, and I think that you could see it in the start of the ball game. 17 unanswered. They looked like they were playing inspired football. Something that I wrote in my column yesterday is that we saw it against Denver after the Antonio Brown loss, and I think that we saw it after the Vontaze Burfict, Khalil Mackness of the whole thing, is that angry Raiders are good Raiders, right? And they're kind of fun to watch. When they play with the chip on their shoulder, I think that's better. And I know it's a cliche, and so is this one. I think that this team, if you look at it strictly, if we were to break down the depth chart, you'd be like, how good is this team, right? But then you look at it, and I think they're playing better than the sum of their parts, and that's because they're angry and playing together, where last year they were angry at the coaching staff a little bit and the front office a lot, and they were fractured and splintered. And this group has come together, and positive results will I think, keep it together during what continues to be a very difficult stretch. Right now, you look at Houston and Green Bay coming up in the next two, and man, like if they go 1-1 and they're sitting there at 4-3, at that point, gosh, like then you really start thinking about it. I mean, heck, I know if the playoffs don't start today, but whatever. How long has it been since the Raiders have been able to say that the playoffs started today, they would be the 6th seed? How about that?
Scott Bair with us. I think you hit on something, steal my thunder a little bit going into this next question. It just, you look at the Raiders on paper and you're just like, okay. Derek Carr, 9 different receivers, I believe he completed passes to on Sunday, and Foster Moreau and Trevor Davis, those were his leading receivers, along with Darren Waller, who wasn't on the team last year. You had injuries, obviously. The balance between the rushing and the passing and those 3 touchdowns all on the rushing side, it's got to be coaching, right? I've been hard on John Gruden all year long, but that when you talk about on paper, they don't look like the most talented team in the world. When you talk about chemistry and belief and staying together and all that's got to be a combination of, I would imagine, vet leadership and coaching, right?
I think it absolutely is, and I think a little bit of kudos goes to Derek Carr in this whole process, because he's not audibling on every play. But John Gruden brought up a great point in his press conference that this run game is partially responsible because Josh Jacobs isn't running into brick walls, that he's getting them into good looks and proper runs, and they're being executed well. In terms of the passing game, it's been a couple straight weeks now that you look at it and you're like, that was a fantastic play call. For example, on that final drive, I know Hunter Renfrow had that big play down the sideline. Foster Moreau caught one deep. Josh Jacobs had a big run, but there was an early, I think it was a 23-yard pass to Foster, right? And John Gruden had the whole defense going right, and Foster swung out left all by himself with nothing but daylight. And if he was Trevor Davis, maybe he's in the end zone, right? But it's that type of play design at that particular moment that you just look back and you're like, the Bears are a very good defense with a very good coordinator, and they got caught with their eyes closed, basically. And those are the types of moments, and I can count 3 or 4 throughout the course of the day, where you think, that's just coaching, right? That's just good X and O management. And that's something that I think even last week, right, that I said, you know what, John Gruden, he's known as an offensive innovator for the innovations that were made 15 years ago, right? And that there's a whole new crop of wacky young kids doing crazy things, right? And that will his innovations kind of pan forward? Well, we're seeing some of these formational shifts where what happens when you talk about Kyle Shanahan, right, is that you talk about him saying the word touchdown before the play's even snapped, right? Because he knows how a defense is going to react based upon what his manipulations of that defense, that he just knows that it's coming, that he knows that a big play is coming. Well, you're saying that John is doing those same things, that he knows how a defense is going to react. That's how you get Foster wide open. That wasn't a blown coverage. That was a manipulation of a defense. And those are the types of things that, if you're a Raider fan, has got to get you pretty jacked because, again, he matriculated downfield for 97 yards against the frickin' Chicago Bears with Foster Moreau, Hunter Renfrow, and Josh Jacobs, pretty good player, right? But that's how he moved downfield. And getting that out of this particular crop is pretty impressive. Because let's not make any bones about it. This receiver core is awful, right? It is not good. And somehow they are finding, and despite the fact that that wide receiver core, I think, had 6 catches for 39 yards, and a guy got the ball punched out at the goal line. That's tough luck, but still, like, you get my point, right? Is that they're doing it without the explosive talent they thought they were going to have. They've gone through a radical schematic shift between what they planned for week 1 and what they're doing right now. And, I mean, the more I talk about it, the more maybe I got to write an open letter to John Gruden for not being very nice to him recently.
Right.
Well, you brought up the receivers. What's the game plan for Zay Jones?
Yeah, that's a guy that you look at his stats. He's got a bunch of drops in his pass. I think a couple weeks ago he had 8 targets and 2 receptions. Not good. Over the course of his career, he's caught 43% of his passes. Not good. And granted, Derek Carr will be the best quarterback that he's ever worked with, but he's kind of a bigger guy that can play that X receiver spot. And it does make you wonder, and I don't have answers for this at this point, but you look at it, and Tyrell Williams and J.J. Nelson and Dwayne Harris, and I heard from 2 people that Tyrell Williams, that there was optimism that he was going to play Sunday, and he just wasn't ready on Saturday and Sunday during warm-ups. He just was not ready to go, and the optimism waned, and there's uncertain injury status with those 3. So John Gruden, what he told us, is that there's not going to be any fun bye-week plans. He's going to be sitting around teaching Zay Davis how to play this scheme. And you look at it, and for as much as there was Keelan Doss hype, he's not ready. And Trevor Davis, I think, is a dynamic player, but there's reasons why these guys are available in trade in season, right? Why they deem these players expendable by Buffalo and by Green Bay, is that all of a sudden, not only do you have to teach him the scheme, you have to make him a very fast reclamation project and get him in positions where he can make plays and be consistent. And that's what they're going to try to do. He's a bigger guy that I'm sure they're hoping can make plays downfield. And it's going to take a couple plays, not only for Derek Carr to trust him, but also for defenses to respect him, so they can create space for Darren Waller, because we are seeing that tighten up considerably. So he's going to have to get integrated quickly. I'm always of a hold your breath sort of a situation, right? There's a lot of excitement maybe about trying to get Stephon Diggs, right, who I don't think Minnesota wants to get rid of. But you think about all the draft picks they've given up to fix his wide receiver core now, and you just can't give up anymore, I don't think. It's kind of what you have is what you're going to have. And they need to get him not to be a dynamic superstar. Let's not just say, oh, they traded for him, so all of a sudden, he's going to go for 14 catches on 17 targets for 175 yards and, quote-unquote Antonio Brown numbers, right? That's not going to happen. But if you can get him to be a functional cog of this machine, that's what fans should expect from this guy. I think anything more than that is unrealistic.
Well, Scott, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good weekend, and we will talk to you next week. Yeah,
man. 3-2, lots of complimentary stuff, and I think they're interesting, right? I don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe they'll lose 5 in a row. Maybe they'll win 5 in a row. But the fact that we don't know is, I think, what makes them intriguing, and that's what makes them a fun story week to week. And as a sports writer who wants people to read his stuff, I mean, that's all that you can ask for.
The Drive.